Hello, friends. Welcome back to my journey as a boss babe who's raising my daughter to be a boss babe just like mommy. If you haven't met her yet, this is my daughter, Braylon Emily, currently spelled BRAXLEIGHYNNE space EMILEIGHEIGH, although the spelling is subject to change whenever I feel like it.
What are the rules?
Braylon Emily is now old enough to go to school on her own, which is why in a video I put out a few weeks ago, I enrolled her in Prager University, run by right-wing radio host Dennis Prager.
Capitalism is the only way to lift great numbers of people out of poverty.
From there, I learned that PragerU educational materials are absolute trash and that my little girl boss in training deserves so much better. Thankfully, today, I think I have found just that. Educational materials to teach her, you guessed it, how to be a true boss babe. There is nothing more girl boss, or boss bro for that matter, than loving the free market. The free market doesn't discriminate based on gender, unless, of course, it's profitable to do so, but you can't argue with money, okay? So I figured I want my little girl to grow up to be a millionaire boss babe woman-trepreneur by the time she's 25 years old, so I need to start enrolling her in a business education now while she is young. So today, I'm going to be taking Braylon Emily to a story time at the local bookstore, not the library because those are publicly funded, and I want Braylon to grow up knowing that taxation is theft. And so at the bookstore, she's going to read a book from the series The Tuttle Twins, written by libertarian think tank founder Connor Boyack, a series meant to teach kids all about why capitalism is the superior economic model.
What makes America great? And England okay, and France terrible.
Let's take Braylon off to the bookstore for today's reading group. Welcome to Storytime at the locally owned and privately funded Big Box Bookstore. Today, we'll be reading The Tuttle Twins Learn About the Law by Connor Boyack. This book is going to introduce you to French economist Frederic Bastiat and his influential manifesto that became the basics for Reaganomics in the 1980s. Has anyone ever heard of Frederic Bastiat before? Wonderful. All right, before we jump in, excuse me, what does economist mean? Oh, well, it means, what are the 1980s? Where I'm from, it's still 1865. Good question. So, does this book have dinosaurs? No, no dinosaurs. What about music and dancing? What about princesses? No, no princesses and no music and no dinosaurs. But it does have other exciting things, like a discussion about the free market, the importance of limited government intervention, and a moral and philosophical discussion about which rights the government is ethically bound to protect and which they're not. All right, let's open up to page 1.
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effin'.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.
Hey, what's up, my fellow small business supporters? I'm Savvy. Welcome back to Savvy Writes Books, the channel where we talk about books and business, where today we've got a double whammy. We're going to be doing a book review of a book that's part of a series written about ways to teach young kids about business, but in my opinion is doing it in a way that doesn't make any sense whatsoever and that I completely disagree with. So stick around because I hope you enjoy that. But before we get into it, please don't forget to subscribe, because if you enjoy videos like these, the types of videos that I make, I put these out every week on my channel. So don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. I would also like to give a shout out to my Patreon supporters who continually make it possible for me to put out these longer videos once a week. I greatly appreciate all of your support. Y'all, check out the names on the screen. Those are the people who support me on Patreon, and if you take a look in the description below, people who contribute $5 a month or more have the option to link something of their own there, so go ahead and check them out as well. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. While we're at it, if you like this shirt, if you like this shirt right here, it is a new merch item that I'm going to be launching in November with my merch brand Hipster Unicorn Fashion. So don't forget to check out hipsterunicorn.myshopify.com in the description below if you're interested in this shirt and other items that I'm going to be making with the cool S design. I have a whole series I'm working on with that. Look at me being a little small business owner, being a little boss babe. Connor Boyack and his libertarian think tank would be proud. And since we're making money and we're on the grind right now, we might as well also give a thank you to today's sponsor. As I'm sure sure you've deduced, today's video is going to be not just another book review, but also a combination book review and discussion of the author as a whole and his ideas. And you guys know how much I love reading books and picking them apart and dissecting them and analyzing them here on this channel. But even when I'm not reading, even when I'm just trying to relax on my phone or turn off my brain for a little bit, I still enjoy being analytical. I still enjoy puzzles and games that really make me think. And that's why today I have a game to recommend to you guys from today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by June's Journey, a hidden object mystery game featuring a fascinating detective story, a diverse cast of characters, all set against the glamorous backdrop of the 1920s, which is now 100 years ago, if you can believe that. That's pretty wild to me. The game's plot takes you through the story of June Parker, who's trying to solve the murder of her sister, which just might lead her to uncovering many secrets about her family. It's a game that I can enjoy playing while I'm lying on the couch decompressing after a workout, because the game is both relaxing and interesting and engaging at the same time. The main gameplay involves searching for hidden objects within the game's settings, which are pretty colorful sets indicative of glamorous 1920s architecture and home decor. Searching for the objects keeps my attention, it gets me really immersed in the setting and the world of the game. The gameplay itself is simple enough to be relaxing while the storyline unfolds, revealing more information to keep you hooked on the plot itself. June's Journey is a free-to-download game available on both Android and iOS mobile devices, or you can also play it on your PC through Facebook Games. To try out June's Journey, click the link in my description below, and don't forget to let me know if you play it, how you enjoy it, whether or not you like the game as well. I hope you guys enjoy helping June solve the mystery of her sister's murder. But now it's time for us to get back to the mystery of what exactly the Tuttle Twins books are about and what exactly the message is that Connor Boyack is trying to convey to his readers. To start, who is Connor Boyack? Connor Boyack, author of the Tuttle Twins book series and founder of the Libertas Institute, is what we might call a free market absolutist. While many of us love that the Constitution calls for a separation of church and state, someone like Connor would also probably love an amendment calling for the separation of business and state. And how would that work? Well, it's easy. According to someone like Connor with his set of beliefs, the very concept of taxation is theft in basically all cases. Connor is also what you might call a libertarian, or as he and some others in his camp sometimes call it, a classical liberal.
Cursing. There's only one bad word. Taxes.
Now, I'm going to try to navigate Connor's specific political leanings with some nuance here, because I do think that these distinctions are important when we dive into these books. Now, as we go into this, keep in mind that I'm not an expert in political science, and I have never worked in government. I don't have any specific expertise on how political distinctions work that you don't already have your own access to. I'm just analyzing Connor, his beliefs, and how they play into his writing from a book reviewer's perspective. So keep that in mind, that if you disagree with anything I say here, you are welcome to leave me your thoughts in the comments below. Often in the US, many people, especially on the left, consider the libertarian movement to be part of the conservative movement, since the libertarian ideology relies so much on pure capitalism, no government assistance, and the complete demonization of social welfare programs as a socialist agenda.
Capitalism. God's way of determining who is smart and who is poor.
However, some libertarians also hate the Republican Party, especially as the far right in the US slides more and more toward, what some of us might call fascism. Many old school libertarians view themselves as inherently anti-authoritarian, which is why they end up trying to distance themselves from a cult-adjacent leader like Donald Trump. I know the political compass graphic is kind of a meme at this point, but I think we should bring it up here just for a little bit of a discussion on the issue. And to be clear, this image is a meme. It's not an official academic resource or anything like that, but I think it does kind of illustrate the point here. Basically, the political compass shows the left and right on the x-axis, where the authoritarian versus libertarian views are on the y-axis, meaning that someone who is an extreme libertarian centrist, basically imagine like a real-life Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec.
Behold! The Swanson Pyramid of Greatness.
Would fall probably in the center on social issues. Like, gay marriage? Sure, sounds great. Treat it just like straight marriage, which according to them, the government also shouldn't be involved in. Just get the government out of marriage entirely, because the government is stupid and nobody should have marriage licenses on file anyway, because that's just the government tracking more information about you. Building codes? Nah, if a builder does a shitty job and their building collapses and it kills everyone, then the free market will put that building company out of business, because no one would hire them anyway. I'm sure all the people who died in that building collapse are going to feel very, very vindicated by that. It's funny when even someone like Joe Rogan is able to easily debunk this argument.
The regulations like that for construction are important, though. You do have to make sure that people don't do stupid shit.
But
make sure you
generally,
don't have a power line that's near a water line. There's a lot of...
But I would put most of that on the builders, though. They want to build things that are good. Now, I get it.
That's not true. Listen, people
people are going to build
corners all the time. Like, you have to have regulations when it comes to construction methods, or people are going to get fucked.
They cut corners when there are regulations anyway.
They do. They would cut a lot more if there weren't regulations.
I'm not totally...
You go to third world countries and look at construction methods, they're fucking dangerous.
Yeah.
That's why schools collapse on kids in foreign countries sometimes. Listen, man, I was in construction my whole life. My dad was an architect.
Yeah.
I've been in construction since I was a little kid. You fucking need regulations. These guys, a lot of people that are in construction, they'll do whatever the fuck they can to make money, and it's not good for the people that have the house, because they might have that house for 5-10 years before that problem manifests itself. The people who are establishing these codes are licensed builders or people that have been involved in construction for a long fucking time, and they know what's safe and what's not safe. That's why those codes exist. It exists to protect the consumers. You can't just protect the consumers through the marketplace, because it takes a long time for these problems to become a real issue, and these problems could potentially damage everybody in the neighborhood. It's not just going to affect the person on this one lot. Like, if a fire starts, it burns all the houses in the neighborhood, or if a flood happens and it floods everyone downhill, it's a real problem. I think there's a lot of idealistic notions about deregulation, and I think there's some consumer protection has to be put in place, because people don't have the time to spend all this time researching construction methods and making sure everything's done correctly, and be there and make sure that the joists are a certain width and they have a certain amount of support. Like, all that stuff has to be done by people who understand code.
Basically, people like Connor Boyack and occasionally Dave Rubin as well, although I think Dave Rubin's ideology is more of just grifter rather than anything philosophical, so watch my review of his book that I put out 2 years ago if you want more info on that. But this is just to say that from the perspective of someone like Connor, the government exists to do the absolute least. Now, Connor is not an anarchist. That's different, because anarchy doesn't have cops.
Anarchy in the UK!
And Connor likes cops, but only when they're protecting our rights to two specific things: life and property. The libertarian philosophy says that we all have the inherent right to life and the right to own property. Those are our two inalienable rights, and that every law has to be in service of the protection of life and property. So laws exist to say things like, you can't kill other people because that infringes on your right to life.
Murder is bad too.
They'd also support laws against theft, since that infringes on your right to property. But according to them, outside of that, the government should make basically no other laws, because the government should be a low-budget operation that by and large stays out of people's business. And to some people that probably sounds fine. After all, government spending is out of control, especially with corrupt leaders doing shady insider trading shit, spending money on their own lavish lifestyles, and playing petty us versus them games that waste all of our time instead of getting anything useful actually done to help us. Wouldn't it be good to rein them in a bit? Wouldn't it be good to remove so many hurdles from independent artists and entrepreneurs trying to start a local neighborhood business, for example? Wouldn't it be nice if we could all just coexist without the government breathing down our neck?
Omelette de fromage.
Well, sure, in some cases, but there's also a point where things go way too far, and I think that most of the libertarian movement has gone well beyond crossing that line. So here's where I think things get messy. The libertarian philosophy can sound appealing when you frame it as absolute freedom, no government intervention in your life. But I found that most people who subscribe to this philosophy are those that spend a lot of time reading and studying and theorizing, but not a lot of time actually living and interacting. And I say this because when you read philosophy all day, when you break things down logically in your brain, like the world operates in a perfectly organizable, if this then that computer programmer binary style flowchart, then yeah, this might make sense. But when you see the random things that can happen in the real world, the irrational ways that people naturally behave, and the complexity of the issues that we as humans face every day, you realize that the world isn't that simple. In my personal experience, I found that a lot of super far-right influencers, people like Matt Walsh, that they are truly evil, malicious people who truly do want to cause harm to others, who want to watch the world burn. But I don't usually feel this same way when I see a lot of libertarian voices. I mean, there are some exceptions to that, but In my experience, I found that a lot of libertarians aren't necessarily malicious, rather they're inexperienced. They're too wrapped up in the theoretical without actually working to see what works practically in real life. Take that clip of Dave Rubin and Joe Rogan, for example. Dave claims that, in theory, the free market should incentivize builders to make their buildings safe because otherwise no one would hire them and they wouldn't earn money. That's a very theoretical way of looking at it. Then Joe brings in the practical piece of the puzzle.
You do have to make sure that people don't do stupid shit.
In real life, many buildings don't show signs of shoddy work until years down the line, so those unlicensed, unregulated builders may end up getting more work in that time, building more unsafe houses, etc., before any of the negative impacts actually show through, and by then it will be too late. People in the real world, real people, will be hurt in the process. So where does Connor Boyack factor into all of this? Connor is the founder of the Libertas Institute, a free market think tank that promotes capitalism and breeds innovation among young entrepreneurs. Sounds cool, right? The Libertas Institute puts on some cool events like the Children's Entrepreneur Market, which encourages kids to make and sell their own items in an entirely child-run craft fair. And honestly, there are some ways that I can think this is kind of cool. Like, as a kid, I was always starting up my own little businesses as well, and that led to a lifelong love of being an entrepreneur, being a self-starter, working for myself, all of that. But when I actually look at the website about this event, everything it says is just a wee bit contradictory. Like, for example, where it says, children can sell almost anything. It can be handmade, store-bought, food, games, or services. No raw food allowed, no animals allowed unless you provide your own insurance and get approval from the local event manager, no fundraisers allowed. Children may not sell goods on behalf of their parents. Children must have an active role in the acquisition and or production of the product. The market does not regulate what is sold. Okay, so which is it? Does the market not regulate what is sold, or can you not sell raw food? Why can't you sell raw food? Oh, probably because kids don't have the culinary education in how to prepare sashimi or tartare grade meats, and then as a result, the raw food is gonna get people sick? Yeah, that sounds like a regulation, and a necessary one. Now, the purely libertarian philosophy would say that the government doesn't need to regulate food at all. If you get sick from what you're eating, just don't buy from that purveyor again, and the free market will incentivize them to make their food safe or else they'll go out of business. Again, that's very theoretical. But do you want to be the one suffering from projectile vomiting, anaphylaxis, or potential death in real life? Do you want to be the free market's guinea pig? So it's probably good that Connor doesn't allow children to sell raw meat. In that case, it's good that he's imposed a regulation. So why does he pretend it isn't regulated? And if the market isn't regulated, why can't the kids fundraise? Why do you, Connor, care what the money is spent on after they make it at a beautiful, completely free market for kids? To further exemplify how the market does not regulate what is sold, Connor hits us with a few more regulations, like, the market's main requirement is that the kids must run the booth and be present the entire time. Children must sell at their booth, no walking the aisles. There is no yelling to attract customers. Please wear gloves if selling food. Bartering is not allowed. If you sell out, you cannot break down your booth until the end. Put a sold out sign on your table and enjoy the rest of the market. Wow, Connor, that's a lot of rules. Why can't they barter? Why are kids only allowed to trade in government approved currency instead of in bartering in a free market, free trade kind of way? What happened to decentralized finance? Why do they have to wear gloves? If you don't regulate the market, then shouldn't kids not wearing gloves also be allowed to sell food? And why can't they yell? If the free market has determined that yelling is the most profitable marketing tactic, who are you to get in the way of this exchange?
Loud noises!
Now, Savvy, you might be saying the children's entrepreneur market may not be free of regulations, but honestly, that makes it a better market. And yes, that is my point. If Connor hadn't tried to grandstand about how this children's craft fair has no regulations and then gave us regulations, I wouldn't have been so quick to call him a
Hypocrite!
So let's look at some of the other things that Connor's organization, the Libertas Institute, has done. The organization has some practical missions and achievements in Utah, which is Connor's own state. For example, getting Utah to remove licensing requirements for cosmetologists, getting Utah to remove mask requirements during COVID spikes, getting Utah to remove gun regulations and guarantee that anyone 21 or older can automatically get a gun no matter what, getting Utah to deregulate and remove licensing requirements from food trucks. Actually, Connor has a very specific fixation on food trucks. He really, really does not want the government regulating food trucks or requiring food truck licenses or permits to run food trucks specifically. He even wrote a kids book about it, The Tuttle Twins and the Food Truck Fiasco. A book for kids about food trucks? That sounds fun. Is this about two trucks competing against each other to make the best hot dogs in town? Is it about a food fight that breaks out at a festival? What happens in the very fun-sounding Food Truck Fiasco? Disruptive businesses often fight against their crony competitors and their allies in government. Ethan and Emily witnessed this firsthand with their food truck friends as they embark on a campaign to win public support and overturn the laws that shut them down. Wow, you made it boring. This is why political influencers are very rarely successful when it comes to fiction or creativity. They are fundamentally boring people. Remember when Ben Shapiro's film production company had a movie called Run, Hide, Fight, and the premise was, what if we did Die Hard but with kids? Yeah, that's an insane plot, and you'd be right to even call it offensive, but Ben could have won the support and respect of bad action B-movie enthusiasts across the country if he'd made it over the top and ridiculous and fully action-packed.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
But instead he made it boring. All Ben Shapiro had to do to market this movie was get the Red Letter Media guys to call it Die Hard meets Children of the Corn or something like that, but with extra terrible writing, and trust me, there would be college stoners coming out in droves to watch this. But instead, Ben Shapiro did this.
Well, the answer is because we are in the middle of a culture war. Okay, the fact of the matter is that the culture is dominated by the left, all the cultural institutions. And it's not just that Hollywood is dominated by the left, it's that their content caters almost solely to the left. You'll have a tentpole flick every so often that really brings in the big bucks, but most of their low-level content is replete with leftist messaging. And the reality, again, is that the critics help exacerbate this problem. If you check out the gap on Rotten Tomatoes between what the critics think and what the audience thinks, it's often quite wide and usually where the movies are most political. So you need an alternative. You need a place to go where you can see entertainment that is not going to deliberately offend your values, where you can see a movie that is actually going to side with you and against a lot of left-wing tropes about the United States. The amount of time that people spend engaging with entertainment content on average dwarfs the amount of time they spend engaging with overtly political content. There's a reason that millions of people believe lies about conservatives. There's a reason millions of people believe lies about America. There's a reason that people look at you, if you don't like these movies, as though you're a bad person. They've been trained to do so by a culture that despises conservatives. You can see it in nearly every film. You can see it in virtually all TV. It is a blanket statement about you. Hollywood is. They won't cater to you.
Yet never has someone made me want to watch a movie less. And I'll watch pretty much any movie. I'm the Quentin Tarantino friend who watches all the weird stuff. I've seen Ben and Arthur like 3 or 4 times at this point.
That's great. Now, let's see your penis.
But the issue here is not that I don't want independent production companies or people creating indie media that represents their values. It's that people like Connor Boyack, like Ben Shapiro, like Dennis Prager all tend to be very boring in the way they go about it. They don't understand what actually motivates humans to want to consume something. And we'll get into that more when we break down the books themselves. But that's all to say that Connor Boyack seems to be agenda first, entertainment second, which is never a winning combination when it comes to writing children's books. Now, when I first started researching Connor, I was willing to give him some credit in a few places. He truly seemed like one of the few late 90s moderate-style libertarians left, and while I don't fully agree with that philosophy, he at least seemed like he wasn't falling prey to the weird right-wing conspiracies about the gay agenda and the COVID vaccines, and maybe he really did just have this passion for the free market that I don't necessarily see as productive, but at the very least he's not full-on evil like the Trumps and the Matt Walshes and that type in the world. I guess even if it means he thinks people don't have to have licenses to do any job. But regardless, even if I think his ideas won't play out well in practice and that they're worthy of critique, I was at least willing to give him credit for the fact that his theories mostly seemed consistent. After all, Connor is, like many 90s and 2000s libertarians, against the criminalization of drugs, in favor of the legalization of marijuana, and finds it utterly shameful that our tax dollars would be wasted on imprisoning people whose only crime was consensually putting a substance into their own body. Cool, I agree. That is, until I learned that he is cool with the government regulating pregnancy. On the surface, Connor, who believes that the government should exist to protect life and property, does view our bodies as both. Our bodies are our own property and they preserve our own life. Therefore, by his own philosophical logic, the government should protect the autonomy of our own bodies at all costs, except when they infringe on others. One of the things he even boasts about on his website is that he was a major force in pushing for laws requiring women to give consent before invasive exams at the doctor. So I thought, hey, that's great. Now, Connor is a Mormon. He's a graduate of Brigham Young University, so I assumed that in having Mormon beliefs, he was probably personally against the termination of pregnancies, since that doesn't align with his beliefs religiously, and as such, he has the right to choose to only get into a relationship with women who feel the same, and they have the right to live their life having those beliefs as long as the government isn't involved. But there's no way he would think that the government, the most useless organization in the world according to him, should have any say in that. Right? Especially since our bodies are our own lives and our own property. Oh, well, Connor wrote this. It should be no surprise that an organization interested in individual liberty and private property is more fundamentally concerned with life. The three are inseparably and inherently connected. A person cannot fully enjoy one without the others. If it's okay to kill a developing child 5 months before its birth, then why not 3 or 1? And if these pre-birth abortions are somehow morally justified, then why does the simple act of passing through the mother's birth canal somehow change the circumstances enough to completely reverse the morality of the act? It cannot be held true that a child has no right to life 1 minute prior to birth, and that suddenly we must protect the human being at all costs who only seconds ago was able to be put to death with little concern or outcry. In the end, Americans must come to terms with their culture of death, whether it be drones dropping bombs on innocent people half a world away, militarized police officers killing people over a plant they grew, or mothers turning their wombs into tombs. We cannot have a serious conversation about increasing liberty in our own lives without first demanding, at very minimum, that the lives of these innocents be protected as much as our own. So this is very, very Ron Paul of him. Very few libertarians attempt to argue the pro-life position, or at least did, back in the 90s and 2000s, because at the end of the day, that does call for more government regulation, which is what their whole position is against. Now, I will say, I do appreciate that while holding this position, Connor is also anti-death penalty, anti-military intervention or over-militarization, because once again, at least you can sort of see the threads of consistency beginning to form. But people like Ron Paul and like Connor, they tend to frame this discussion as the right to life. The government exists to protect our right to life, and the fetus or the embryo inside of you is alive, so then terminating that pregnancy would infringe on that person's right to life, right? But no, that doesn't make sense. Here's my question. If right to life supersedes all, does that mean that we all have the right to life at the expense of other people? So if we say for the sake of the argument that an unborn baby is a full human with a guaranteed right to life, does that mean I have to let it live inside of me personally? Isn't that infringing on my right to life and property, since my body represents my own life and property and I don't allow intruders inside of it? Like, what if I want to give the child up for adoption? That would require throwing them out of my home, which I'm allowed to do because my home is my own property and I can surrender them at a fire station or something. But I can do that because I don't have to let anyone in my home who doesn't have legal ownership of it by law. So if my child has a right to life and they need a kidney and they're like a full outside of the womb grown child or whatever, and I decide I don't want to give them a kidney, even if I'm a match and I'm the only match and they die, by that logic, should the law consider me a murderer because I didn't use my body to save someone else? What if my theoretical child had to be hooked up to my body to receive blood transfusions from me in order to survive and I didn't want to do it? Or what if someone already did it and like when I was unconscious after an accident, they hooked up the child for blood transfusions and then I took it out because I said, no, I don't want to do this. I don't consent to this. Am I a murderer then because I let them die and I took the action to do that? How far does this go? How much responsibility do we legally have to save another person's life? See how this line of thinking only functions in the theoretical realm and it completely ignores the practicality of what happens in real life. At the end of the day, if you believe in the right to life, liberty, and property, and you can understand that a person's body is their own property that represents their own life, then morally, since according to Connor himself, morality is to be legislated, the government can't force you to allow someone else to live inside of your property, even if that property is your body. And at the end of the day, I really don't give a shit if life begins at conception or birth or somewhere in between, because that's philosophical and laws exist in the realm of the practical. So this is just one example of how boiling everything down to life, liberty, property doesn't quite work when you place it in every real world situation, because we're going to run into paradoxes, into situations where the protection of one person's right or freedom necessitates the violation of another's. And that's why, as humans building a society dependent on the social constructs we form with one another, we must collectively decide which balance of efficiency, protection, and freedom we want to strive for. But Connor Boyack isn't interested necessarily in this nuanced view or an analysis of what it means to navigate the paradoxes of absolute freedom. Rather, he just wants to regurgitate existing manifestos of philosophers of the past, but simplified for kids. And that's what he does in his book series called The Tuttle Twins. The Tuttle Twins book series. The Tuttle Twins series currently consists of 13 books. I'm going to be reviewing the first book in full a little bit later in this video, but let me know in the comments below if you want me to review more of them. Also, when I was in the process of scripting this video, one of my favorite channels, Fundy Fridays, actually also released a video on the Tuttle Twins, and their video focuses more on the TV cartoon adaptation of the Tuttle Twins, so I highly recommend that you go ahead and watch their video if you'd like a breakdown of the cartoon as well. I will link that video in my description below. Don't forget to check it out. But this video is going to focus on the books themselves with a special emphasis on the first book. In each book, preteen twins Ethan and Emily Tuttle go on various adventures to learn all about the importance of keeping capitalism pure and uninhibited by the government. And by adventures, I mean things like sitting down with the old guy next door in his living room to hear them give him a lecture.
Lego my foot in your ass.
That's literally the plot of the first book. The other books also include fascinating, gripping, wild plots like, based on the famous essay I Pencil by Leonard Reed, this installment of the Tuttle Twins children's book series helps young kids learn about the free market. And history abounds with examples of government officials making decisions, well-intentioned or otherwise, that harm others. Unfortunately, these unintended consequences are never anticipated and rarely considered once they occur. As the Tuttle Twins find in their latest adventure, central planning can ruin people's lives. And, inspired by the popular 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, this story sees the twins organize a boot camp for Uncle Brock to help him see the power of these ideas and how each of these ideas is like an ingredient that, when mixed together, can lead to great results. Each book also has discussion questions at the end, which, on the surface, I really do think is cool. I love discussion questions in books. My own books for kids, the Forever Home Friends series, which all tell the stories of rescue dogs and cats and their journeys to adoption, they all feature discussion questions in the back as well to get kids thinking about the book's themes, identifying the characters, and more. Actually, since it's October, don't forget to check out foreverhomefriends.com, linked in the description below, where you can get the fun Halloween story, Max the Vampire Kitty, all about a cat who uses his own creative skills to dress up as a vampire, go trick-or-treating, and find a forever home. 10% of profits benefit local animal shelters. Anyway, my whole point is that I think discussion questions in books are wonderful. When I was a creative writing teacher, I loved engaging students in discussions of the books we'd read, and when I used to do author school visits, one of my favorite parts of the event would be using discussion questions to spark a conversation with the kids and get them relating to the material. So I sure hope my boss babe daughter, Braylon Emily, is participating in the discussion questions at story time today. All right, let's do the discussion questions at the end of the book together. Here's a question. What rights do you have? The right to vote? Like, as an adult, I mean? Wait. We don't have the right to vote because we're women and it's currently the 1860s for us. Incorrect. All of you. The only rights you have are life, liberty, and property. Voting is just a social construct. What's a social construct? Don't worry about it. The leftists are abusing the concept nowadays anyway. How about this question? If bad guys can be in government, how can we know who they are? When we know who they are, what can we do about it? Bad guys in government are like Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee and the people who ran the Confederacy. My mom had to escape slavery. Are the bad guys in government like the ones who stand by and let cholera and yellow fever spread? Didn't any of you listen to the book that we just read? The bad guys in government are those who take our hard-earned money through taxes. Excuse me? Yes, Braylon Emily? If taxation is theft, are we going to learn how to evade the IRS? No, not today. That's next week's lesson. Who is Frederic Bastiat? The first Tuttle Twins book is based on the book The Law, written in 1850 by French economist Frederic Bastiat, which I'm not fully sure if I'm pronouncing correctly because I've watched a million videos on this guy and everyone pronounces it a little differently. Anyway, this book is where the phrase life, liberty, and property comes from, the phrase that the libertarian movement likes to use as their mating call. In this book, Bastiat argues that the role of government is to protect life, liberty, and property, and nothing else. Some of his most famous quotes include, "Socialism, like the ancient ideas from which it springs, confuses the distinction between government and society. As a result of this, every time we object to a thing being done by government, the socialists conclude that we object to it being done at all. We disapprove of state education. Then the socialists say that we are opposed to any education. We object to state religion. Then the socialists say that we want no religion at all. We object to a state-forced equality. Then they say that we are against all equality," and so on and so on. It is as if the socialists were to accuse us of not wanting persons to eat because we do not want the state to raise grain. Quotes like that, as well as, "I do not dispute their right to invent social combinations, to advertise them, to advocate them, and to try upon themselves at their own expense and risk. But I do dispute their right to impose these plans upon us by law, by force, and to compel us to pay for them with our taxes." This dude's legit like a real life version of Andrew Ryan from BioShock. Let me know in the comments below, how far do you think that classically Abby and her husband are going to get through BioShock before they realize that he's the villain? Taking bets on that, let me know below. Anyway, Frederic Bastiat was known for being heavily influenced by economists like Adam Smith, known for his book Wealth of Nations, a staple of free market literature, and Bastiat is often aligned with Austrian economics, a theory that boils economics down mostly to the motivations and incentives of the individual. Central to Bastiat's work includes the concept of plunder. According to him, whenever the government takes money from you by force, such as through taxes, that is a form of plunder, and that the existence of plunder indicates an immoral government. Because each Tuttle Twins book is essentially retells a classic piece of economic literature, the first book is, of course, based on the book The Law, since, of course, kids need to learn about the life, liberty, and property principle before we can build on anything else. So let's head into a full review of the first book in the Tuttle Twins series. Book review: The Tuttle Twins Learn About the Law. Got it right here. Here is the synopsis of The Tuttle Twins Learn About the Law, book number 1 in an exciting new series for kids. I'm sure this description is going to grab the attention of Minecraft-obsessed 4th graders all across America. It says, children are often taught that government protects our life, liberty, and property, but could it be true that some laws actually allow people to hurt us and take our things? Join Ethan and Emily Tuttle as they learn about property, pirates, and plunder. With the help of their neighbor Fred, the twins will need to figure out what they can do to stop bad guys in government. If I'd read this synopsis to a group of first graders in 1990, most of the kids in class would go back to trading Pokemon cards under their desk, and little 6-year-old Ben Shapiro would start foaming at the mouth. So is that this book's target audience? Real life young Sheldons? Because if so, that's an awfully small target audience. The answer, of course, is that that's not the target audience. The target audience is actually parents, not kids. This is a common problem that we see with out-of-touch business owners and marketing executives, not knowing how to reach their end customer and instead pandering to the middleman customer with the money. Just watch Jenny Nicholson's recent video about the failed launch of Star Wars fashion dolls, all because Disney failed to understand what made kids like the Monster High dolls that they were modeled after, and instead chose to pander to the parents who were consumed with Star Wars nostalgia.
I feel like these dolls were designed without thinking of children as their own human beings with their own psychology, and very specific ways that they tend to play with specific kinds of toys. I think the most obvious and cynical explanation is these dolls are for the children of adults who like Star Wars. I have seen no children play with these dolls or express interest in these dolls in the store, and I already sense people saying, that's not true, my niece or daughter or little sister has these and she loves them. And to that I ask, does she have them because she, completely organically and unprompted, asked for them, or does she have them because you or another adult who loves Star Wars got them for her as a gift? And I'm not trying to shame you, by the way, if that's the case. It's very nice that you got a child a toy as a gift.
This is especially a problem when it comes to children's media created by political influencers. When you're too focused on the message rather than the story, your product is going to suck. Now, from Connor's perspective, I can kind of understand targeting the product at the parents. After all, Connor loves capitalism, and in a free market, those with money are the ones you market to. And adults are the ones with money, not children. So it makes sense to pander to adult sensibilities and create something utterly boring that lacks all imagination. So is Connor's goal education or profit? Honestly, it's probably profit, in which case, well done. I know his business is doing well. Good job, bro. But I'm here today as a book reviewer, and in my personal opinion, these books completely fail in the realms of creating an interesting, engaging story, and they also don't do much in the realm of actual education. So let's dive in. On the positive side, the first thing I noticed about this book is how good the paper and ink smell. Like, how nice the cover feels, how good the pages feel. So, Connor Boyack and company, if you're watching this video, please comment below and let me know what printing company that you used, because I might switch up the printing of my own books after feeling this quality. So, see friends, see this quality? You know what that means? Capitalism breeds innovation. So from a physical production perspective, very well done. Now, onto the story's content. At the start of the book, we meet Ethan and Emily Tuttle, who, according to the text, were happy 9-year-old twins who are brother and sister, but also good friends. That's nice. Now, normally this could be a setup for seeing Ethan and Emily come into a conflict with each other somewhere along the line. Maybe even though they're twins, they won't be on the same page about everything, and they'll end up having to argue with each other and learn how to problem solve and work together. Do we think that's gonna happen? No, of course not. Ethan and Emily are basically one character for the entirety of the book. Their actions and their dialogue are interchangeable. I honestly couldn't figure out what the point of making them twins even was unless the author just liked the alliteration of the Tuttle Twins, which does have a nice consonance to it, I won't lie. Also, there's the possibility that he made them twins so that we could have one boy and one girl, thereby inviting readers to see themselves in both of these kids regardless of gender, rather than narrowing his audience. That's what I assume the motivation was, and it's not a bad idea, but it isn't played out to its full potential. If you're going to have two main characters, use them. Instead, Ethan and Emily are never apart from each other. They're in the same class, they do the same homework assignment together as partners, and they have the same opinions on everything and always agree with each other, which is honestly just boring. Anyway, Ethan and Emily go to school where their teacher gives them an assignment to interview someone in their life who has wisdom. And as the book says, both of them immediately thought of their next door neighbor, Fred. Cool. Ethan and Emily just both think the same things at the same time because they're one character, because the writing is lazy. So we meet Fred, the next door neighbor, who works growing tomatoes in his garden while Emily and Ethan hang out in their treehouse. They enjoy talking to Fred and asking him things about science and how the world works, and he's always happy to give them information. So they head over to Fred's house after school to ask him to share his wisdom with them. And this is where the writing gets really lazy. The twins follow Fred to his home office upstairs, and it says, "It was like being in a library, with bookshelves all around the room. There were also extra stacks of overflowing books piled everywhere. Fred clearly liked to read a lot." And then the illustration shows us Fred with all his books. When I first started writing picture books and I first joined critique groups with other authors to improve our writing, one of the things that we always helped each other with was this idea of balancing the writing with the illustrations. In picture books, the illustrations aren't just there as bonus content. The artist has a chance to tell pieces of the story visually as well. We'd all be pretty bored if we watched movies where a narrator kept just jumping in to tell us what we're supposed to be taking in from the visual cues on screen instead of letting us just become immersed in them. So it felt really redundant to describe his office so thoroughly and then follow it up with, "Fred clearly liked to read a lot." You think? Here I thought he had a ton of books around just because he enjoys inhaling dust. In all seriousness, drawing inferences is an important skill that kids start learning in elementary school. If you're a parent or a teacher and you're reading this book to your kid, what's a more fulfilling scenario? To tell your kid, "Fred clearly liked to read a lot," or to point to the picture and say, "Look at that, what do you think Fred likes to do?" And the kid gets engaged in the conversation saying, "I bet he likes to read, look at all the books." It's a small thing, and if this were a sentence in an otherwise awesome book, I really wouldn't care. But combined with all the other things that we're going to talk about, it's just another example of this book putting the message and the agenda above making the writing itself interesting and engaging for the audience. So the kids tell Fred about their school assignment, that he has to share wisdom with them so they can write a paper on it, and Fred instantly whips a book off of his shelf, The Law by Frederic Bastiat, because that is the general concept of wisdom. When a 9-year-old asks you to share wisdom with them, what do? A, tell them about the lessons you've learned in your life through your career, maybe through raising a family, everything you've learned about how to prioritize, what's important in life to you emotionally. B, tell them the story of how you got started in your career and what you learned about perseverance, never giving up, and the importance of finding your passions. Or C, read them a book by a 19th century French economist who died of tuberculosis, all about why taxation is theft. Maybe I'm just not that cool of an elderly neighbor, but option C sounds boring as shit to me. But of course, that's the one that Fred goes with. And this is where we learn that the twins are stupid. They don't have any ideas of their own. Their heads are completely empty, no thoughts, head empty. They exist solely as a conversation partner for the adults that are there to lecture them. So Fred shows them the book, saying that it's something that affects them every day, and Emily asks, "The law affects us every day?" The twins even glance at each other with a, quote, look of confusion.
So I am confusion.
Yes, Emily. The law affects you every day. You're 9 years old, and you've been never taught that laws exist and we have to follow them? What kind of question is that? And in case you're thinking, well, maybe they didn't mean that literally, maybe they just didn't know what law meant in the context of this book. No, they actually are that dumb. The next page says, Ethan still wasn't convinced. He was used to learning about interesting things like sharks or Venus flytraps or rockets. I love that moment of self-awareness from Connor right there, the author. Kids, I know you were probably hoping for a book about something interesting, but libertarian philosophy is more important, okay? Anyway, so then Emily says, our uncle is a police officer. I think he works with laws. You think? You're 9 years old, Emily. This is Paw Patrol level knowledge. Then on the next page, out of nowhere, we get hit with God. We just get smacked in the face with God's monster dong. Think of rights this way. God gives us our lives and he gives us our ability to think, learn, and act. God also gives us the ability to know when things are right or wrong. Then on the next page, Emily writes, "Our rights are from God" in her notebook, and Fred continues, "God gave us these things and we have the responsibility to preserve and develop them." Okay, Fred, but your own 19th century tuberculosis-riddled man crush Monday even said himself that he doesn't approve of state religion. Sure, Bastiat does say that he approves of religion in general when not run by the state, but isn't it a little confusing to kids to tell them you're about to explain something called the law to them, only to then immediately bring up religion, which is not a part of the law, and that the guy who wrote the law doesn't want to be a part of the law? These kids are too dumb to remember what police officers even do. I don't expect that their brains are fully flowing with nuance just yet. Now, I'm guessing that Connor's target audience is probably fellow Mormon parents like him, so maybe most of these people just don't see anything out of place here, but as someone who isn't particularly religious, I find it odd and out of place, and it really jumped out at me, especially since the libertarian position sees religion as something you're free to participate in, but never something that the government can mandate. And I know that a lot of the elderly libertarians in the world are religious, but if you remember like mid-2010s YouTube, you probably remember the aggressive onslaught of libertarian atheists on this platform. So at the end of the day, the two demographics, while there's overlap here and there, they're not actually linked causally in any way, so it seems once again like lazy writing. It's just a cop-out. It's just a quick, lazy way to explain the concept of something that's inherent to you. So if I were Connor's editor on this book, I'd ask him, why not instead make the kids a little smarter, a little more capable of understanding things, and explain to them that by nature of being human, we all have the right to be alive. Yeah, that's more philosophical, and that might be harder to convey in writing for elementary schoolers, but Connor, my dude, you signed up for that challenge when you chose to write a book for kids about a post-French Revolution economist.
Challenge accepted.
So then Fred explains to them how sometimes the government has bad guys in it, and the main characters, Ethan and Emily, just sit there listening. And then Fred invites him out to his garden to look at tomatoes, where he continues to talk to them, and now they stand there listening. Have you noticed a pattern yet? We're about halfway through this book, and Ethan and Emily haven't actually done anything. The only decision they've made is to interview Fred, and then Fred took the reins and is now driving the rest of the story. That's actually another thing that we always worked on in creative writing critique groups when working on drafts for kids' stories specifically. It's very easy to fall into the trap of making the adult characters swoop in and solve all of the kids' problems, especially since in real life, adults actually do have to help their kids with a lot of things. But when you're trying to get a kid to connect with a character, to see themselves in that character, to remember that character for the rest of their life, that character needs to do something memorable. They need to solve problems. They need to have their own skills and interests that they can use to push the plot forward. Imagine the Peanuts comics if the adults weren't just trombone noises and instead they were physical characters walking into scenes to remind Charlie Brown that he has to pick up Snoopy's poop out of the yard. And that was the whole comic. Like, that was Peanuts. Imagine the Pokemon universe, except instead of training Pokemon, Ash just watches his mom train Pokemon and sits there taking notes all day. Would these things be nearly as memorable to us? No, kids need to see people like them using their brains and their own personal skills and strengths to solve problems and save the day. That's what gets kids invested in reading and what helps them create higher expectations of themselves. So anyway, Fred just keeps talking and the kids keep listening, and Fred is like, see my tomatoes? What if Mrs. Lopez next door wanted to steal my tomatoes? That would be wrong, right? And the kids are like, yeah, stealing is bad. And then Fred says, now imagine that Mrs. Lopez asks your police officer uncle to help her get one. What would you think if he came back and took my tomatoes to give to Mrs. Lopez? And Ethan's like, yeah, that's still wrong. And Fred's like, even though it's someone who works in the government? And the kids are like, yeah, it's still wrong. So on the one hand, it is nice that Connor's acknowledging that cops too break the law sometimes. Connor has been critical of the police before, and at the very least, I'll give him credit for not falling into the cops are always right mentality that a lot of right-leaning people tend to have. At the very least, he agrees that if a cop does something bad, they're still a criminal. However, the story doesn't actually continue along this path. Fred's basically like, great, so we understand that stealing is always wrong in every situation, right? And that's the theme, no matter what, stealing is wrong. Okay, for an oversimplified moral, it's not bad. We don't want kids to think that stealing is good, but we know where Connor's taking this next, right? If stealing is always bad, even when people working for the government do it, and the government charges us taxes, Doesn't that mean that taxes are always bad? Yeah, that's literally where it's going. So Fred explains that he likes to store extra tomatoes in his house. I guess he pickles them or something, or uses preservatives, I don't know, but he jars them up and then he donates them to people who need food. That's nice of him. We appreciate your service, Fred. But it's not just a message about how nice it is to donate food to others. Instead, this is a full-blown parallel to trickle-down Reaganomics. Fred makes the argument that if the government taxes us, we won't have as much money to donate to people who need it. If everything is privatized, humans will naturally just choose to help each other out. He says so on page 42. True laws protect people and their property from plunder. When true laws exist and are respected, people work hard to improve their lives, and they work peacefully with others. Everyone prospers together and is happier. Ronald Reagan would agree.
Ronald Reagan? The actor?
The people who all died of AIDS while he denied them healthcare would probably disagree, but both sides of what I just said aren't alive anymore, and neither is Frederic Bastiat, so we're going to have to make some assumptions here. But here's my question. Okay, if all taxation is theft, but we don't want an anarchist society because we need cops to protect our right to property, who pays for the cops? Our taxes? How much is the government allowed to take from us to pay the cops and taxes before it becomes theft? Is there a specific number? Is there a specific line somewhere? And in case you're thinking, well, obviously he isn't saying all taxation is theft, just that taxes are too high sometimes. No, the illustration on the next page literally shows us that all government-funded programs Connor believes to be the result of plunder. I will give him credit and say that at least he's consistent somewhat once again. On page 44, the illustration shows a guy holding up a sign that says "Bail out Wall Street," and this guy is portrayed as the bad guy, someone who is misusing government funds. But there are also some interesting signs like "Vote yes for schools" and "Free education for all." So is Connor saying that funding public schools is theft? Probably, considering the original quote from Frederic Bastiat we read earlier. We disapprove of state education, and the socialists say that we are opposed to any education. So I guess the argument is that if we don't have public schools, we'll save enough money on our taxes to afford private schools. How much do you think private school costs? And what about poor people? Do they just not get to go to school? Because we've done that before. Hundreds of years ago, literacy was considered a skill for the nobility, and the world was overall less educated and less productive for it. A well-educated population is good for all of us, but when we have a purely individualist perspective, anything that's good for multiple people at once is socialism if the government's involved. Now, I went to public school. I'm glad I can read, because if I couldn't read, how could I possibly challenge the ideas of people like Frederic Bastiat and Connor Boyack? Or is that the point? They want less people to be able to read so that less people can question them. So Fred says everyone wants to take instead of give. Some people stop working hard and begin looking to the government to take care of them instead. When this happens, the government begins to control everything. So, okay, couple questions here. First of all, how do the kids visualize this? Remember, Ethan and Emily are too stupid to remember what laws or police officers are, and so far they've shown no knowledge of anything other than the ability to quietly listen to adults. So when Fred says, looking to the government to take care of them, what do the kids think that means? So far, all he's shown us are tomatoes. Are they visualizing that the government's just handing out tomatoes? Do these kids know what welfare is? Do these kids understand public schooling? Are these kids aware of Medicaid? Do they know what specific programs the government is funding? Or are they just somehow able to know exactly what Fred meant when he said take care of them? Anyway, then Fred tells the kids that it's important to protect their rights to property, and he sends them home and he gives them a jar of tomatoes as a gift because he's such a generous guy. And then the kids decide to give the tomatoes to Mrs. Lopez as a gift, as a way to illustrate how natural the trickle-down economics cycle is to human incentivization. Again, now that the kids have tomatoes to give, they'll give them. Mrs. Lopez didn't need to take them because obviously the kids would give them to Mrs. Lopez, and then Mrs. Lopez gives them a cookie. And then the book ends. Literally, that's the end. The kids never write their report. The initial inciting incident that it sets up at the beginning of the story, the school paper that they're writing, that's never resolved. We just assume that they got an A, I guess, unless their teacher's like, I'm sorry, you talked to the old man next door and he told you the government is corrupt and steals from people. Did he yell at clouds too? That's really the paper you're turning in?
Is that what we're learning in business school?
Also, do Ethan and Emily go to public school? Is the teacher going to be offended when she sees that these kids have learned that wisdom includes the fact that her salary is the result of plunder? I don't know, the book never tells us. Now, I don't think a retelling of the law is a great idea for a kid's book to begin with, but if Connor had at least wanted to do it well, if he was really passionate about this idea but wanted to do it in a way that was engaging and exciting, there are some things he could have done instead. For example, imagine Ethan and Emily Tuttle are hanging out in their treehouse, eating some tomatoes from their neighbor Fred's garden. Another neighbor comes over and steals a jar of tomatoes without asking and then runs away. Ethan and Emily now have to find the missing tomatoes. Maybe Ethan wants to pursue this person, but Emily wants to give up because it's just one jar of tomatoes, but Ethan's stuck on the principle of the thing. You know, give the twins a little conflict between the two of them. And then Ethan and Emily meet another neighbor kid whose family couldn't afford groceries that week, so they think, hey, we should be nice and give them tomatoes. But our tomatoes were stolen. How can we give them tomatoes when our tomatoes were stolen? So now Emily's on board to help find the tomatoes too, so that they can help this other person. And then the kids go through a series of neighborhood hijinks, like maybe they gotta run through a sprinkler, maybe they get chased by a cat or something. Something visually interesting we can see on the page that also gets their heart rates up and gets us invested in the tension of what they're feeling. And then eventually maybe they find the tomato thief and it turns out that it's a bully from their school, and then they have to explain to the bully that they want to give the tomatoes to a kid who actually needs them, so they have to wrestle the tomatoes back from the bully. And then at the end, their neighbor Fred can pop up to be like, hey kids, this reminds me a lot of a book called The Law by Frederic Bastiat that we'll read together when you're older. And then the discussion questions can break down the themes of that book and draw the direct comparisons between The Law and the story we just read. I still think that plot would be oversimplified and would have too many holes in it, but at the very least the kids would have some agency, there would be some conflict and some tension in the story, there would be something to keep readers invested. They'd have to solve their own problems, including a disagreement between the two of them, and they'd learn why stealing is wrong and how they can help people when they have the resources to do so. I definitely disagreed with the economic theories in this book, but even just on a writing level, I didn't like the way that the story unfolded. It was boring. The kids' personalities weren't memorable. There was no actual conflict within the story itself to be resolved. The only conflict presented to the kids is that they have to write a paper for school, and we as the audience never get any resolution to that. I think that maybe the Libertas Institute at the end of the day is not the right school for Braylon Emily either, and that this reading group at the big box bookstore absolutely sucks. Maybe next time I'll take her to a reading group at the library instead, unless Kirk Cameron keeps getting library directors fired. I don't know. What do you guys think of the Tuttle Twins books? Let me know in the comments below, and please let me know if you'd like me to review more of these books in the future. Another quick thank you to June's Journey for sponsoring today's video. If the mobile game June's Journey sounds interesting to you, don't forget to check out the link in my description below to download this intriguing, mysterious game and give it a try for yourself. Hope you all enjoyed today's video. I will see you guys again next week for more videos. In the meantime, keep on plundering. Bye!
Get you some nuts! Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.